This is Senator Mark Mullet, who represents Washington's 5th Legislative District. Senator Mullet is not running for re-election to his Senate seat, so he recently made a farewell speech to his colleagues on the Senate floor. Before that, though, his fellow senators surprised him when they donned Mullet wigs, as seen here. The wig wearing led to some comedic moments.
Senator Mullet, I believe you are singularly responsible for this breakdown in decorum. And while I think that's actually a better look, for example, on Senator Hansen's part, I do think we should proceed with the business at hand. Senator Mullet?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the Senate do concur in House Bill 5949. I've never seen this chamber look so good. I mean...
Is that you, Senator Wagner?
It could be. I move to excuse Senator Fortunato.
On Saturday, the negotiations did get a little hairy, Mr. President, but we made it through. And much like the inspiration for many of our amazing and trending hairstyles today, it's because we like to party up front and make sure we get back to business at all times.
Few of you will understand this, but I want you to know that the President has just received a message from Lieutenant Governor Scherberg and the beyond, and he is not pleased.
After these humorous moments, Senator Mullet gave his farewell speech.
Senator Mullet, for what purpose do you rise?
Point of personal privilege.
State your point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. This would be I think everyone does know, I have already announced since last summer I won't be coming back to this body, but I would like to share with the folks in this chamber why, for the various jobs I've had in my life, why this is actually my favorite one. When I finished college, I did finance. I worked for a Swiss bank called UBS for 8 years. Most of that was in London. I then worked for Bank of America in Midtown Manhattan for 5 years, and then in 2006, I moved back to where I'm from in the Pacific Northwest because I wanted to raise my daughters here, where I grew up. And then I completely switched careers to opening a pizza restaurant and 4 Ben & Jerry's ice cream stores. And then back in 2012, I successfully ran for this body. So I've had this job now for 12 years. But out of those various jobs, this one for me, by far, has been my favorite. And I think that's for a variety of things. First off, it's the most intellectually challenging job that I've ever faced. And I go back to 12 years ago where you start these 8 a.m. routines where you're doing 15-minute meetings. I remember that first year, my first 4 meetings were on McCleary, they were on Highway 18, they were on insurance rate filings, and whether or not you can shoot wolves that are trying to attack your cattle if you're in Eastern Washington. And this is what I love about the job. There's no way you can talk about insurance rate filings and shooting wolves to protect your cattle in the same hour unless you are completely focused and you block out the 18 other things you normally worry about in your life. And this job actually makes you have that level of focus, which I love about it. I think the other reason this has been my favorite job is I caught a nice break back in 2013. Senator Sharon Nelson reached out to me that session to say, hey, I might need your help on the capital budget. At that time, Senator Nelson was not only in Senator Wynn's role as Vice Chair of Operating, she was also the lead for the Senate Democrats on the capital budget. She was doing both roles. And she said, hey, you have a background in finance. Could you go to the negotiations with me so we have someone to look at the numbers, make sure we don't lose track of any of the member projects? And I agreed to do that. Imagine my joy, Mr. President, to discover I had found a budget that math determines has to be bipartisan. To issue bonds in our state, you need a 60% vote. And I'll be honest, Mr. President, my favorite times on this chamber has not been when we're arguing with each other across the aisle. My favorite times in this chamber is when we found bipartisan agreement to pass good public policy that we all believe is going to improve the lives of every single resident who lives in the state of Washington. And that's why I've loved my time on the capital budget. I think in 2017, Mr. President, another reason this has been my favorite job is I caught another break where I was appointed to be the Senate rep on the Washington State Investment Board. So imagine my pleasant surprise to know I could use my background in finance not to create shareholder value, but to actually create value for our pension system so I could pay like my wife's teacher pension. The State Investment Board is very unique because unlike all of us, they actually don't want any public attention. But I am convinced, Mr. President, it is the best run state pension system in the United States of America. And I've been extremely proud to have the honor to serve on that board for the last 7 years. But the final reason I'll say, Mr. President, why this has been my favorite job, it's the people you get to work with. And the general public, they see one half of the story. I think, Mr. President, if you were to try to count how many of my bills have passed, 48 to Bob, you probably would have to take your shoes off. I don't think you could do it just using your fingers. That's what the general public sees. What the general public doesn't see is that in my dad's funeral in 2017, I was on that stage at that funeral. I was an emotional wreck, and I looked out in the audience, and there's not Senator Bob Hasagawa, there's friend and work colleague Bob Hasagawa in the audience at my dad's funeral. I look out in that same audience, I saw Republican floor leader Joe Fain, and I saw the newest member, Senator Lisa Wellman, who told me she knows what it's like to lose a parent, and she was there for me at that time. I think, Mr. President, what the public sees is our majority leader, Senator Andy Billig, whose job is to pass the priorities of the stakeholders for the Senate Democratic Caucus, is sometimes fighting me harder than he is the Republicans on the other side of the aisle. And that's the half the general public sees. What the general public doesn't see, Mr. President, is the hardest thing I've ever went through my entire life was my divorce back in 2014. So imagine my surprise when at my pizza restaurant in Issaquah, in walks not Senator Andy Billig, but work colleague and friend Andy Billig, who has now traveled 300 miles from Spokane to sit in my pizza restaurant and let me know that he too has been divorced and knows how hard it is to get through. And I'll never forget, Mr. President, and he gave me advice. He said, Mark, no matter what you're feeling right now, you're gonna be co-parenting 4 daughters with 2 parents now living in separate homes. You want those homes to be as close as humanly possible, which was not what I was thinking at the time, Mr. President. But I cannot tell you how many times in the last 10 years that my daughters have forgot their favorite shirt or their favorite pair of jeans at their mom's house, and they literally walked 2 blocks to pick up that item. And if it hadn't been for friend Andy Billig coming to take time to share that perspective with me, that 2 blocks would probably be 20 miles, Mr. President. And I gotta be honest, those are the 2 toughest things I've ever dealt with my entire life, was my divorce and the passing of my father at the young age of 74. My friends and colleagues in this chamber have been here to support me through those toughest times. I'm genuinely grateful and really appreciative of that support. Mr. President, you've been so eloquent in reminding this body that if you were to go back to 1889, when we became a state, you could add up all the people who've had the privilege to sit in the chairs where we sit today, they literally would all fit inside Issaquah High School. That's how unique our responsibility is that we have to serve the state of Washington. And I think our ultimate challenge is good public policy, Mr. President, does not fit on a bumper sticker. Good public policy is complicated. It takes listening. It takes compromise. And this is what we have to do if we want to truly serve the residents of Washington State. And I think, Mr. President, you open every session reminding us of our Senate rules. There's one particular rule that I think is the most important. I promise you I'm going to take this with me for the rest of my life, no matter what I do. I think it's one of the most important things I've learned in this chamber. Do not impugn the motives of others. I think that is a general life philosophy we can all live by, and I'm convinced, Mr. President, if that Senate rule was adopted by this entire country, America would be a stronger and better country to live in. And so hopefully we can all work on that going forward. And this chamber has a unique tradition. When you give your very first floor speech, which for me was 12 years ago, you have to give a gift to everybody in the chamber. Of course, my gift was Ben & Jerry's ice cream. Well, I'm sure that comes as no surprise. So this being my last speech, I have brought back the Ben & Jerry's ice cream, the best ice cream in the state of Washington. Right now, there is chocolate peanut butter s'mores. Yes, there's enough for the rostrum staff. You also have plain vanilla. 3 of my kids are non-dairy. We have some of those as well. And I just want to say I've genuinely loved and cherished my time here. Thank you very much.